Okay, I think we'll get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Holland. I'd like to welcome you all to Pinchin's open webinar on risk management buildings and infrastructure during a time of climate change. My name is John Holland. I'm the Chief Development Officer of Pinchin, calling in from Vancouver, and I'm joined by our two panelists, Carl Spensieri from Toronto and Gord Rajewski from Edmonton. A bit of background on these webinars. Pinchin have been providing open webinars to our clients, well, for a long time, but specifically during the period of COVID to help the community deal with this, with sharing our knowledge. And as we hopefully emerge from the last year and take our lessons forward, we're going to be broadening the subjects of those webinars to be more topical to the broad challenges facing the buildings and infrastructure and industry sector that we work within. A recent study on insurance from the Insurance Institute of Canada reported that major weather impacts are doubling every 5 to 10 years in Canada. Weather claims in Canada are predicted to increase to up to $5 billion in the next 10 years. This represents a significant risk of compromised or uninsurable assets and a redirect on how we design for future impacts. In Toronto, our own University of Toronto was one of the first universities in North America to establish a resiliency research capacity. In 2016, the U of T and BOMA Toronto collaborated to lead a study to investigating what building infrastructure can physically carry in the event of an extreme shock to its operations. The practical limits identification and space optimization, calibrating the changing urban fabric with the challenges of climate change and how we design buildings to mitigate in a more intensely occupied city. The outcome of this study and its collaboration contributed to the development of new UN standards on smart city connectivity to enable resilient communities. We have staff from BOMA on the call today, and we thank you for your leadership in this area. Next slide, please. Okay, well, a few housekeeping issues to help you with the webinar. Please get comfortable and adjust your audio so you can hear us clearly. There are a couple of features on the Zoom interface. Chat is for if you have technical questions, you can't hear us, can't see, please go to the chat box and we'll try and help answer those questions. Maybe could people raise their hands just to verify that we can be heard by you? And I trust that check's happened. And the Q&A box is for your questions to ask panelists through the session, and we'll moderate those and answer as many of these as we can during the session. And next slide, please. So we have two speakers today. Our first speaker is Carl Spensieri, who is the VP of Environment at Berkley Canada, a niche specialty insurance carrier. Carl focuses on delivering better outcomes for clients by using his expertise to underwrite complex environmental risk and deliver creative risk transfer solutions. Prior to turning his attention to underwriting, Carl worked as an environmental engineer at a Toronto-based environmental consulting company. He then joined a Canadian law firm working within their environmental law group. Carl's area of expertise includes merger and acquisitions, due diligence, professional liability, environmental liability, assessment and risk transfer, property transactions, and complex infrastructure projects. Carl holds both a Master of Applied Science in Engineering, Chemical and Environmental Engineering from the University of Toronto, and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of London in Britain. He's also a professional engineer in Ontario. Gord Rajewski, our second speaker, is the National Practice Leader Building Science and Sustainability for Pinchin, and he's been employed at Pinchin since 2018. Gord holds an honours diploma in building construction and engineering technology from the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, and he's a registered engineering technologist. Gord has more than 35 years of building envelope and roof consulting experience and has undertaken projects throughout Canada, the US, and Africa. Gord provides senior management and key technical leadership for all building science projects at Pinchin. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank all of you for attending. I just looked at the list, people from Halifax to Victoria on the call today. So thank you to all of you for showing up and being here. And I'll pass the podium over to Carl. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's see if we can get the slide advancing here. Great. Well, So first off, what I'm hoping to discuss with all of you today really falls into one of three themes or ideas. And the first, let me apologize right out of the gate. It's a little negative, but we have to get through it just so that I can set the stage in terms of what the insurance industry and really anybody who owns property, what they are facing over the next decades. Item two, try to inject some optimism. And truly, I am quite optimistic about how we will deal with climate change. And then item three, I hope to speak to a few topics relative to the insurance industry and just provide you with some ideas and things for further thought. So with that, we'll jump right in. So let me begin by saying, relative to the sort of risks that insurance companies have on their balance sheet, property insurance, and therefore the impact of climate change, is probably the single largest liability that an insurance company carries, at least a Canadian insurance company. And over the past 20 years or so, I would say the majority of those types of claims, property type claims, are really driven by wind and water events. And we call those events catastrophic or CAT events. And now having that as the background, where I want to take us is to Florida, so maybe a little bit of a warmer climate, and just give you an idea of what we can learn as an industry from what we would consider the most mature CAT marketplace in North America. So just some background. So 98% of Florida's population lives in a coastal county. From 1851 to today, 120 of the 292 hurricanes that have made landfall in the US have hit Florida. And the most recent large hurricane, Hurricane Michael in 2018, caused roughly $8 billion in property damage. All right, so think of Florida, one event, $8 billion of property damage. Now let's go back to John's opening remarks. For Canada, we're projecting as a country, we might see $5 billion in property type losses at some point in the future. And John also alluded to these events are happening more frequently. So let me give you some more data there. If you go back to 1935, that's the first time a major hurricane, Cat 4 or larger, hit Florida. It took almost 60 years for that to happen again, Hurricane Camille. 30 years later, Hurricane Andrew came in, and roughly a little less than 30 years after that, Hurricane Michael. So you're starting to see these massive CAT events are starting to happen with a little more frequency. And that's another thing that's causing the insurance industry concern. So again, focusing on Florida, we have roughly 2.9 million single family homes that are at risk to a Cat 5 hurricane. And that represents about $581 billion in property value. So what did we do in, again, a place like Florida? Something called Citizens Property Insurance Corporation was created. And this is effectively a government-owned insurance company with really the only mandate being to provide property insurance for homeowners. This public entity, plus all of the private entities that insure property in Florida, have an estimated property-related premium each year of about $10 billion. So again, let's just think about that as if you put your insurance caps on, you're writing about $10 billion a year in property premiums. Every so often you have a major event like Hurricane Michael that comes in that wipes out or causes $8 billion in losses. Then you have to pay your regular everyday sort of property losses. Oh, and by the way, at some point, you're going to get hit with a Cat 5 event that causes $581 billion, roughly 60 years for you to recover from that event. So, these are major, major problems for the insurance industry. And of course, you can't simply sit there and go, all we're going to do is charge more premium for the risk. Because of course, at some point that becomes unsustainable. And again, one last data point I'll leave you with relative to Florida. The average cost of homeowners insurance in Florida is $3,600 US a year, whereas for the average home insurance for all of the US is about $1,200. So people in Florida already paying 3 times more, and we already know that that premium will be completely insufficient to deal with the types of losses that we expect that they'll see in the future. All right, let's move a little closer to home. Let's get to Ontario. So Ontario, it's a bit of a different scenario here because we know very little about the flood risk that we have in Ontario. And what you see here is a map of Toronto showing what we believe to be the flood prone areas. And I say believe to be because really what insurance companies are modeling with right now is historical flood data for sure. Also trying to understand how the city of Toronto, as an example, has kept up with their own municipal infrastructure, and trying to understand how the lack of keeping pace and how some of the insufficient capacity of our sewer systems in Toronto, how that will also contribute to the risk. And so basically, from an insurer's perspective, we think pretty much anything south of Eastern Avenue in Toronto is likely very ripe for some sort of flood type event. Again, these models are not very well defined, and there's a lot of reasons around that, but it causes us significant concern as an industry for a variety of reasons. Obviously, there's, how do I charge the appropriate insurance and how do I create the appropriate policy language? And so policyholders are seeing that today. If you have homeowners insurance in this part of the world, it's basically a patchwork of I'll cover you for overland flood, but not sewer backup, or I'll give you sewer backup, but not infiltration. There's a variety of sublimits that get applied to people's policies. So the industry, you can see, is really uncertain how to tackle the problem and uncertain on how to price the problem. So that's what the industry is grappling with. At the same time, if you're a property owner, we can go back to a 1990 study that was done in North York for some homes that were near the Don River. And once the city completed its assessment of the flood risk on those homes all experienced an average property valuation drop of about 16%. And it took almost 2 decades for those homes to sort of regain their property value. Imagine that happening on a massive scale in the Toronto area, and imagine what that would create in terms of housing crisis, credit crisis, things like that. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, and then we'll move on. Imagine a major storm event, some sort of major flood event that triggers mass flooding in the Toronto area. Homeowners who are then, perhaps adequately insured, perhaps not. And for those that are not, you have to make that difficult decision of, hey, do I incur $50,000 to $100,000 of my own money to fix up and respond to what's happened, or and compare that to the other sort of financial realities a homeowner might have in terms of making mortgage payments and everything else. So these are the types of things that we grapple with as an industry: traditional insurance, and then broader implications. What does it mean for the greater community? Let's move a little further north in Canada. The image to the top right shows you our oil and gas pipeline network in Canada. These are, well, at least to me, every time I see this figure, it's always a surprise. And we have quite a lot of this infrastructure in our northern communities. And these communities are often, described as pristine or sensitive environments. And obviously, they're just at greater risk should some sort of environmental, event occur there. Here too, we have the same problem. So our risk management frameworks, the models that we used to rely on as insurance companies, they're just proving to no longer hold up. So as an example, what you're seeing on the bottom right, it was very common to see pipelines built right on top of what we thought was secure permafrost. And of course, now this is subject to freeze and thaw cycles, creating settling and landslide type events. So again, the risk management frameworks that we thought made sense are starting to show themselves to be incorrect. And then there's also just the difficulty of, again, how do you price for this? So if your models aren't correct, then the premiums that you're looking to charge and the covers that you're looking to provide are probably incorrect as well. Okay, so here's where, we start to have, some real concrete examples. And again, Toronto area, my apologies. But so you start to think about how do you manage flood? And again, the old way of doing this for insurance companies was to look at flood maps, floodplains, and use that data, that historical data, to try to inform us relative to future risk. Well, okay, now let's think about Union Station. So here's some photos. Top right is Toronto Harbourfront. This has happened at least 2 times in the last 5 years where the Harbourfront has experienced significant flooding. But then even our Union Station, right, one of the biggest transit hubs in North America, let alone Canada, has flooded in 2012, 2016, 2018, and 2019. That's 4 times in a decade for one of our most significant pieces of transportation infrastructure in the country. So I'm going to leave that here, and actually this is where Gord will pick up as his presentation comes in. He'll be starting to talk about how we can evaluate and identify these risks and what we can do about that with regards to existing buildings. Well, I'll now switch and try to be a little more optimistic and speak to what it is we can do, going forward to help us overcome. So, one of the reasons I'm often criticized for being too optimistic relative to climate change, but one of the things that I realize today is that at least we understand what the solution is, and we understand, regardless of what your views are on climate change, whether you're just selfishly wanting the environment to improve, whether you have an economic incentive for that to improve, or you just believe in environmental issues. One of those 3 threads is pulling you into the debate and asking you to take action to solve the problem. And again, we have a concrete understanding of what the problem is and the steps needed to address it. Anyways, here's some solutions that the insurance industry, in collaborations with others, has put together. So the first one, again, relative to flood, what you're seeing at the top right-hand corner, these are homes in California, designed to help communities deal with New Orleans, Katrina type events in the future. These homes are designed, they're actually anchored into a foundation, but they're designed so they can float and move up and down as needed in the event of a flood. And not only do they rise and fall with water levels, they're also equipped with solar panels, and they're also equipped with water filtration systems, so that these homes can basically act as their own self-contained pods, not needing power from the grid and not needing water from a municipal drinking source. And in this way, if you have a major flood event like we did, the families in these homes are able to basically be self-sufficient for a period of up to 30 days. So that's quite an interesting design, and obviously rather novel. The elements here add about almost $100,000 to the cost of a home. But you can imagine, as you scale this and try to push it across broader communities, suddenly these costs do not become too much of a disincentive, especially when you compare it to the benefits of a community that can basically withstand a flood event. It starts to become pretty easy math to make these sorts of improvements work. The Dutch came up with an even easier way of dealing with this. These homes that you see here on the bottom right were built in 2005. And basically these homes were built with the understanding, with the idea that they had to be able to survive flood events. And so they're built with materials, and the main level that is susceptible to flood is designed to allow for that. And I don't have a photo of it, but Vietnam is taking a slightly different approach, where they're basically using very sustainable materials, very easy construction techniques to simply say, hey, if we have to rebuild a bunch of times, at least we can do so with materials that are sustainable, construction techniques that are sustainable, and minimize the impact and the cost of that rebuild. So again, just a variety of different ways to tackle the problem and adapt to the problem. we've been talking an awful lot about wind and water. Fire, interestingly enough, I mean, fire is what created the property insurance industry. And we've done such a great job of controlling that risk and minimizing that risk that it's no longer one of the main, drivers in terms of property losses. But we are starting to see it come back up. And this is just a function of our climate warming and unfortunately drying out. And so again, let's go south of the border and go to the other coast this time. If you happen to live in California, there's roughly 4.4 million homes in California that we think represent around 11 million people who are at risk each year due to wildfire. And if you happen to live on the west coast of Canada, I'm sure some of you experience the smog and the smoke associated with this year's fires in California, all the way up in Vancouver. So, again, here we have tools available to us. There are certain design elements we can incorporate into communities. We can even do things as extreme as creating communities with built-in fire corridors so that when these wildfires happen, they go through the community through a predetermined path, sparing critical infrastructure residential areas and directing the fire elsewhere. There's obviously, building materials that you can use that are, fire resistant. But then there's really simple things. And so the photos that you're seeing here on the right, top left is sort of your typical community with, homes surrounding a golf course. And then some architects said, well, hey, what about if we flipped it? What if we put the homes in the center and had the golf course surround the homes? Suddenly you create a natural fire break. And again, you're talking the same amount of land, the same function, probably very similar construction costs. And yet, this facility, this community with the golf course around it is much more resilient to that risk going forward. So those are some, simple examples. And now at this point, I just want to hit on the third topic. So the first piece, obviously I am part of the insurance industry, and as such, they don't necessarily let me out very much. So when I get an opportunity like this, I certainly want to raise a couple of things that I see impacting our industry and our insureds. And I think that they're just items that maybe need additional conversation. So the first one, during COVID-19, Government of Canada made some grants available to businesses. And the one requirement for businesses to access those grants was that they agree to make certain climate change and ESG reporting part of their regular disclosure. And so ultimately, you sit there and you look at that, especially someone like me in the environmental industry, you sit there and go, this is a great idea. And I think shareholders and investors need this information. And I think this is the direction we want to go. But what concerns me, though, is using an event like the one we've just come through to try to make some companies take this step perhaps a little sooner than they were ready to. And the reason I say that is if you've ever been part of preparing any financial documents that these companies have to disclose, it's quite the process. And there's a lot of controls that need to be in place. And there's a lot of research that needs to be done for those disclosures to be accurate and not to cause additional problems. And so, one thing that we look at as an industry is we go, hey, we're insuring directors and officers, and we see this as something that potentially puts them at greater risk, right? And again, fully supportive of the idea and think that that is the way to go forward. Additional reporting and transparency is always good, but you kind of need to think about that step of what liability are we now imposing on these companies by asking them to do this, years before they were perhaps otherwise ready. Access to capital. So there's been a lot of activism around ESG issues, and for good reason, obviously. But relative to the insurance industry, I always find it interesting that from time to time, insurance companies are targeted for past investments that they've made or past obligations that they've taken on. And just like a bank, when they give you a mortgage for your home, those commitments might run 5, 10 years. And so sometimes you can't necessarily get out of them. What I find interesting, though, is that pressure that gets exerted on insurance companies often results in two things happening. One, suddenly the ability to insure traditional oil and gas risks diminishes. And that causes me concern, because I sit there and I go, if you think back to that slide earlier on about that pipeline sitting on top of the permafrost, those are exactly the sort of risks that we want to make sure continue to be insured for as long as those facilities remain operational. You do not want to be having an environmental issue up north without that facility being insured. And yet that's exactly what's happening. As the investments pressure gets put on, then companies also become unable to insure those types of risks going forward. And I'm not sure that that's in the best interest of all of us. So that takes care of a couple of talking points, and then I will wrap up just to give you an idea of what type of insurance might be coming into the marketplace to address climate change. First one, very quickly, is parametric insurance. This is becoming more and more popular in the US, and we hope Canada will allow us to start bringing this into our country soon. The idea here is an event happens. So let's just say a municipality buys insurance and says, in the event of a Cat 4 hurricane, policy pays out $100 million. The benefit of that is the municipality can then use that money as they see fit, as opposed to, oh, if your building gets damaged, if certain other things happen, then the policy pays. This is just, you confirm the event, policy pays out. On the environmental side, there's new products coming out where we can start to use environmental policies to fund the cleanup of known pollution conditions. Again, helping to minimize what those CAT events, the sort of pollution losses those CAT events might cause, or to fund ESG initiatives. And then lastly, one of the more traditional ones that's been around for a while, for anyone undertaking a project that is supposed to yield a GHG emission credit or an offset, you can buy insurance to ensure that if that project doesn't yield the credits or offsets you were looking for, you can buy insurance to basically deal with that deficiency. So with that, I will say thank you and pass it over to Gord.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for signing on. You're going to find that our presentation includes a lot of the same themes that Carl has introduced. So without further ado, just a second here. Okay, we're just trying to get the screen. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about more of the engineering and how to better prepare building infrastructure against extreme climate change. So I'm just trying to advance the slide. There we go. So our overview today will cover quickly climate change in the built environment, the difference between sustainability and building resilience, how we do assessments for climate risk, a little bit of ESG discussion. Carl's already touched on that. And then we're going to show you some common sense design strategies for achieving resilience at the building scale. And then we will wrap up. What is resilience? Resilience is, by our definition, durability plus sustainability together equals resilience. We think resilience is the future of sustainability at Pinchin. There's a lot of interconnected aspects. Multiple energy sources are considered, recycled, reclaimed water, disaster fortitude design, emphasis on passive systems, reduced environmental effects, floodplain evaluation, locally sourced materials, access to transportation, and indoor environmental quality. These concepts all intermesh between sustainability and resilience. Now let's talk a little bit about the work that can be done to anticipate extreme weather events. We call these climate risk vulnerability assessments. These vulnerability assessments are steeped in codes, if you will, protocols that have been established and are in place and have been working in Canada for many years now. going back to 2008, the PIEVC engineering protocol was first used to evaluate Canadian infrastructure against climate risk. In addition, there's the ASTM guide for climate resiliency, planning and strategy, the CSA guide for durability, ISO 31000, and all of these protocols are taken into context with BOMA BEST, GRESB, Fitwell, IRM, LEED. So what does a climate change vulnerability assessment look at? It looks at your site. It looks at your structures. It looks at your base building systems, communications and security, interiors, equipment and furnishings, and it proposes risk mitigation and adaptation measures. It does this in concert with climate modeling. So essentially what we do first is we look at where your infrastructure is located, and then we use a model that has been designed by Environment Canada to try to evaluate what the weather might be like in 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Knowing a little bit of that climate model data, we can then apply that to what we'll call our climate lens, so that we can then better evaluate your infrastructure against risk. The outcome or the output of that assessment is a report. So this is a snapshot of a report that was prepared for 6 GO stations in Metro Toronto, where the evaluation included an assessment of the building structures and the systems in those building structures. Out from that, table is prepared, which is basically the climate lens output. This particular study concluded that the 2 greatest risks to these GO stations in Toronto were flooding, overland flooding, and loss of electrical transmission or electrical power. So once that was understood better, adaptation measures could be then proposed and recommended and eventually designed. So let's talk a little bit of strategic asset management and the economics of adaptation. Who's going to pay and how's that going to work? First, we have to consider, as Carl pointed out, the ESG aspects. So for those who might not be that familiar with what ESG refers to, it's environmental, social, and corporate governance. These are the 3 central factors in measuring the sustainability and societal impact of an investment. So this is really key because ESG is becoming a leading factor in how the developers are going to be funded going forward for their new designs, and may also be funded for retrofit measures, adaptation measures that could be required to make their buildings more resilient in the face of extreme weather. One of the benchmarks that is used by investors globally is called GRESB. And this is a global benchmark for the infrastructure sector that assesses ESG performance at the asset level for infrastructure asset operators, fund managers, and investors that invest directly in infrastructure. The tool offers high quality data and advanced analytical tools to benchmark ESG performance, identify areas for improvement, and engage with investors. What's the bottom line? Investors are a lot more involved in development decisions than perhaps ever more. Investors are driving our response to climate change. So what's the ROI? Pinchin considers that adaptation measures that would be required for most existing infrastructures to be quite expensive. Taking a look at an older office building that is maybe quite vulnerable to extreme weather, who's going to pay for that? It's not going to come from government incentives. So we must look beyond the government for help. So one of the things that we are putting out there as Pinchin is, can proposed adaptation recommendations provide an ROI? What if a consultant recommended $1 million worth of retrofit to an aging building, and that recommendation could also be folded into a plan for rejuvenation of the building? Would it be possible to attract a better scale of tenant? Would the property value go up by implementing the adaptation measure? These are the questions that developers and building owners and managers are asking and should be asking. Should owners commit to holding and retrofitting? Should they divest or demolish and redevelop? These are all of the part of the equation around how we are going to respond to climate change, particularly looking at our existing building stock. So Carl mentioned the key barriers to achieving resiliency in existing buildings is front-end capital and capital risk. If you spend it, will you be able to recover that expenditure, and how will you measure that? Pinchin is also an influencer in the idea that adaptation measures can pay back owners in real time in short order. Here's a simple concept that involves taking existing infrastructure and introducing decentralized energy storage measures to both address peak shaving, so being able to spend less during peak hours by using photovoltaic cells and smart battery technology. You're storing power during the day from the sun's energy, and then using that stored power at peak times to save money. And at the same time, those systems that are paying you back today are also available for backup during an emergency. A simple snapshot is an RBC branch in Ontario. The upfront investment for system equipment to introduce smart battery technology and photovoltaics was $65,000 for that particular branch. It was estimated that greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by 2,800 kilograms. That would involve 47 tons of total GHG by 2035, which is a central goal of the RBC. This also results in 54% annual cost savings, and it presents a 5-year ROI. Now, why wouldn't an owner consider something like this for their building? You've got a short ROI, a relatively small upfront capital investment. You're doing good things for the earth, and you're paying yourself back in real time. Implementing adaptive measures, once they are understood what those measures are, what their cost might be, it becomes essentially a construction project at that point. There has to be a good design, a good plan. There needs to be tendering, and there needs to be construction and project management. Plus, there needs to be good commissioning and follow-up. Now let's shift gears and talk a little bit about some of the things that my friend Carl has introduced to us today. The Institute for Resilient Design talks about different design strategies. The first of which is design and construct or retrofit buildings to handle severe storms and flooding, wildfire, and other impacts. The image that you see on your screen references or is of a village in the Philippines that is highly prone to hurricane conditions. You can see by the shape of the buildings and the way they are spaced that this particular community has been designed to anticipate the high winds associated with hurricanes and the other effects. Second strategy is to locate critical systems to withstand extreme weather. If it's identified that the key systems that we need to survive are vulnerable, we must now start to plan how to move them or protect them. Third strategy, model design solutions based on future climatic conditions as much as possible. This is an excerpt from a request for proposal from the Vancouver Coastal Health Region, where they're asking consultants to include in their design process what the weather might be like in 30 years from now, so that the design is taking into account that the weather that we're experiencing currently will not likely be the same in the future. Fourth design strategy, create buildings that will maintain livable conditions in the event of extended loss of power or heating fuel through energy load reductions and reliance on passive heating and cooling. So if the power goes out for an extended period of time in Winnipeg, Manitoba, or anywhere on the prairies when it's cold and it's January, how can we create livable conditions that will allow people to survive and be sustained? That's the principle of this design strategy. Fifth strategy, create durable buildings using features like rain screen details, windows resistant to hurricanes, interior finishes that can dry without needing replacement. Why are we still using gypsum wallboard in 2021? This is a material that when it gets wet, it deteriorates and promotes the growth of mold. By now, we should be looking at something better, shouldn't we? Because this is one of the first products that is often removed after a flood condition. So I'll leave that with you now. We also want to use low carbon input materials and systems, materials such as wood, bamboo, and low energy input masonry. We want to design for durability and robustness. Sixth strategy, create beautiful buildings that will be loved and maintained. We are not advocating building concrete pillboxes and bunkers that no one will be happy living in. We're not advocating buildings that have no windows, that don't have natural light. We're actually advocates of the opposite, that if we can create designs that people will enjoy being part of, but these designs are also created with resiliency in mind, likely these buildings will be preserved, they will be maintained, and people will enjoy being in them. Seventh strategy, reduce dependence on complex building controls and systems, provide manual overrides in case of malfunction or temporary power outages. So simple analogy or simple example is the water pump. Perhaps we'll have wells or other means to draw water from should the electrical power be down for a while. Eighth strategy, optimize the use of on-site renewable energy. Design and plan buildings for low external energy inputs for ongoing building operations. Design for high energy efficiency, including passive solar heating. So the image to the right shows you a shape of a home that incorporates passive solar heating, allows the sun in, allows the walls and the floors to be heated using the sun's power. The image to the left is a solar panel grid that one can purchase and have available on their property to collect power and to pay back to the grid. Ninth strategy, design buildings for maximum daylighting. Daylight will be the primary source of lighting for buildings in the post-carbon city. So the shape of your building, the way the windows are positioned in your building to allow the light in and to reduce the need to have electric lighting. Carry out water conservation practices and rely on annually replenished water sources, including potentially harvesting rainwater as the primary backup water supply. So this is not a new idea. We've been doing this for some time. Some communities are doing this already better. Here's an idea that I'm quite fond of, which is recognizing that as extreme weather presents and annual rainfall and extreme rainfall will be increasing in certain locations in North America, what if we were to re-examine the ability of a building to store and capture that rainwater for a period of time while we allow the municipal system to catch up, if you will. If we could store more water on top of the building safely without it causing damage to the interior, we could use that water as we needed it elsewhere in our processes and our daily living, or release it back slowly into the municipal infrastructure system. This would involve some significant redesign of structure and waterproofing and all of those elements, but this is called a blue roof as opposed to a green roof. Another way to provide redundant water supply is the concept of using gravity-fed systems, which have been around for hundreds of years. In small communities throughout North America and Canada, in particular, the image of the water tower to the right is still with many people, as some of these towers remain in use. On the island of Manhattan, if you go there, you'll look up and you'll see lots of these wooden structures on top of buildings. These are in effect gravity-fed water reservoirs that are provided to supply water whether or not there's power available in the building or not to drive the system. Considering options for human waste disposal in the event of non-operating municipal wastewater, using composting toilets and waterless urinals. The 12th strategy, designed for use of local materials, available products, and skill sets. Resilient cities will need to be much more localized in their use of materials and products. We use the example of the Richmond Olympic Oval, which is a beautiful timber-framed structure with laminated beams that arch through the interior. All of these products are locally available in British Columbia. 13th strategy, we must specify products and materials that will not off-gas or leach hazardous substances in the event of flooding or fire. So I already spoke to you about why it is that we're using gypsum board, drywall, still to this day. We use it because it's cheap and it's readily available, but it's one of the worst materials that we can have inside our home if there's a flood. So if we were to look at alternate products that will not mold, will not cause people to be ill post-flood, then that's what we should be doing. We should be considering opportunities in building code and looking at materials that will be healthier for us in the event of extreme weather loss. We should be relying on vernacular design practices. Basically, what we're saying here is we want to go back to the future, if that makes sense. There are many lessons that can be learned from the past that we should be bringing forward as we contemplate extreme weather and the effects of extreme weather as climate changes. 15th strategies provide redundant electric systems with at least minimal backup power, such as fuel-fired electric generators with adequate fuel storage or a solar electric system with islanding capacity. Now we're going to shift into some other examples. Here's a real-world example from a school in central Alberta. The image to the right shows a school, a modular portable classroom. Many schools have modular portable classrooms. This particular site, the portables had been there for 12 years, never experienced the problem until the last 3-4 years when the soil started to heave every spring. So the skirting that protects the, keeps kids from being able to crawl under these modular classrooms, as well as keeping critters from crawling under these classrooms, is becoming damaged annually. So the image to the left is a simple sketch of how you can introduce an adaptive measure that recognizes that it's likely that the heaving annually is going to continue. So if we know that this is happening, we can adapt to that and create simple designs that will allow the soil to move up and down in the spring without causing damage that has to be repaired and replaced annually. Use of fire-resistant cladding materials. Here are various images that show the effects of heat and fire on residential buildings. The image to the bottom right shows a car that was parked out in front of a house. The neighborhood was subject to wildfire. The car suffered melting and other damages, whereas the house, the cladding actually did not, because it was of a kind where it could be resistive to fire. In Fort McMurray, during the wildfire, more than 25% of the building infrastructure burned. But what we also don't always hear is that 80% of the building infrastructure suffered damage from smoke infiltration, soot, and other particulate damage. So if we understand that wildfire is a threat and a risk, why aren't we putting more thought into how to create filtration systems at the outside of the building envelope, in recognition that if the building doesn't burn, it's probably still going to be subject to harmful smoke infiltration. Use of fire-resistant and fastened roofing materials. Communities that are subject to tornadoes, hurricanes, and other significant events like that have already learned that roofing has to be anchored. It has to be fastened. It may also need to be resistive to fires. So here are some examples of what we're talking about. Metal-clad roofing stands up reasonably well to tornadic winds and hurricanes relative to other kinds of systems that we could possibly consider. Borrowing from the past, using passive cooling strategy. So these are images from Roman and Greek, where we're basically using the design and the shape of the building to allow water that might be in a reservoir to be used to create humidity inside the building. We're also using the shape of the building to allow the wind to pass through the building and create ventilation. Modern examples of that, passive interior ventilation strategies include transom windows and just the basic design of and shape of buildings to allow the air to flow through during those times when you can't actually have your windows open in Canada. Modern buildings like the Manitoba Hydro building on Portage Avenue in Winnipeg incorporates many of these principles. So you can apply the same kinds of thinking to high-rise design as you can to residential design. Basically, we're trying to use passive techniques to reduce our reliance on mechanical fed ventilation. Protect critical infrastructure within the building. This is a institute in California where you can see by the shape of the building that the building has been designed to let the water flow through it. All of the critical systems are inboard of the outside. They're protected inside concrete ductworks. So this building is quite protected against flooding, wind, fire, and other such weather. maximizing daylight through floor plan shape, let the light in. So this is an old example, an old building in Edmonton, Alberta, a federal government building that incorporated many of these philosophies in its design. Using hurricane and seismic connections. A lot of these devices are not expensive, and our building codes need to be updated to reflect their use in residential and wood frame construction in particular. So for pennies on the dollar, we can already be improving the robustness, the resilience of our wood frame structures by incorporating some of these ideas. Considering different shapes for wind and tornado resistance. The image to the left is a school in Oklahoma in Tornado Alley. It's the focal point for the community during emergencies, and its design reflects that, that need and also the fact of where the school is located. Considering below grade applications, lots of examples of that. Elevate for flood protection. Carl talked a little bit about this, so here's some further examples. Floating homes. We have communities already throughout Canada where floating homes are present. If we are aware that we're in a floodplain, homes should be designed for that, that fact. So I am an advocate of creating homes in floodplain areas that would not have permanent foundations, but would either be tethered or, as Carl pointed out in his slides, the opportunity for the building to remain in place and move up and down as water levels rise and fall. So now we've come to the end of our presentation. This is our journey map to resiliency. We start by recognizing that our existing buildings in Canada are exposed to risk from climate change. So the next thing that we need to do is do an assessment of the vulnerability associated with that risk. Once we've established that and created a thoughtful report, we go into construction and design, we commission that, and then we re-audit. That is our journey map to resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you, Gord, and thank you, Carl. Two excellent presentations, some very thought-provoking sections there. One question, well, a few questions, but one question I'll ask, it's for you, Carl. It's really regarding the replacement concept of insurance. It's in Calgary, we had a substantial insurance claim as a result of a hailstorm. One of the challenges was that the insurance didn't cover to upgrade to replace the shingles to hail resistant. They just replaced the old model, if you like. Is there any move in the industry to make the replacement more resistive to future claim, or is that not there yet?
Well, so an example, great question, and then an example I can point to. So Gord talked about creating roof structures that are more resistant to wind. And that's something the insurance industry actually did fund in Canada about a decade ago. A lot of insurance companies would fund installing those metal roof clips, the hurricane clips, as they rebuilt, because that was proven to be so effective at reducing the risk going forward. I think what we're talking about here is the impact resistant shingles. And, there's some debate on, just how effective those are, but clearly, if that's something that ultimately reduces the industry's exposure going forward, I think you will see insurance companies step up and start to fund those types of betterments. But they are what we consider a betterment, and so it has to be part of the insurance that you're buying, right? Yeah,
that makes complete sense. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Second question for you, Gord, I think, on the design strategies, which I found really interesting, the variety and the practical indications you gave. Did they come from an industry standard, or are they an agglomeration of experience or a guidance document, Gord?
The simple answer to the question is they come from a variety of sources. The 13 or 14 design strategies that I glossed over in my presentation come from the Resilient Design Institute. But there are many other sources that are now feeding into this. So RELY, GBCI, LEAD, all of these are potential sources for these design strategies. We're also recognizing that building codes across Canada are now being updated to reflect the need for creating sustainable design as well as resilience in design. So the answer to the question comes, the design strategies come from a lot of different locations.
Okay, great, thank you. And a question really for both of you, but based on, it was based on, I think, your slide, Gord, on the Royal Bank in Ontario and the 64% return, I think, based on doing some creative energy design and load shedding by having on-site battery storage for power. We also mentioned that investors are impressed by or want to see more sustainability in companies' images. Do we have any examples of where our organizations are advertising their sustainability, their resiliency as part of their ESG, or is that yet to come?
No, there's lots of examples. We were approached by a developer who is proposing a mixed-use commercial retail development in just outside of Montreal. And one of the requirements that they have from their investors is that they provide a vulnerability assessment prior to the development being funded. So they are looking for consultants who will be able to tell them, take a look at their site, take a look at their concepts for design, the kinds of buildings that they're going to have, all of that, add that to the consultant's knowledge of the site area, and then have that consultant model what the future weather might be for that area, and then go back and look at the design. So for example, one of the things that might come from such a study is, what if 11 inches of rain fell in an hour? How would the municipal stormwater system be able to adapt to that? Well, what if it couldn't? So what would we do with all of that water that fell in such a short period of time? So the answer to that might be from that consultant, well, we need to keep more of the water on the site in a safe place. We might put it on the roof. We might create reservoirs around the site area. But what would we do if so much water fell in a really short period of time? How would we be able to assist in the design of that property to prevent significant damage from overland flooding?
Great, thank you. Well, we're at time now, so I want to thank my presenters for just excellent presentations, great content, and good questions from the audience. Thank you for that. You will, before you sign off, you will get a Q&A pop up for the participants. If you could respond to that. We keep presenting these and try and make these relevant to you by responding to the questions you have about where the world is going. So if there are subjects you'd like us to present, please put that in your questionnaire as a response. And this presentation will be available at pinchin.com at our website in the next few days. So stay tuned to download the recording if you'd like to see that. Big thank you to everybody for attending. Big thank you to the presenters, and have a good, safe day, everybody. Stay tuned for more webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.